Commander Jake Morrison stood at the big window of the space station and watched the last human ships getting ready to leave. The ships were huge and powerful, but they moved slowly, like they were sad to go. Jake had been in charge of this station for 5 years, and now he had to shut it down forever. The Galactic Council had made their choice 3 months ago, and there was no going back now. A council meeting had been terrible to watch. Jake remembered sitting in the back of the great hall while the alien leaders talked about humans like they were dangerous animals. The Vorthic leader with his purple skin and 6 arms had spoken first. He said humans were too quick to fight and too hard to control. The bird-like Helians agreed with loud screeching sounds. Even the wise old Altarians, who usually stayed quiet, had nodded their ancient heads. Dr. Marcus Webb had been humanity's voice at that meeting. Jake knew Marcus well because they had worked together for years. Marcus was smart and calm and always knew what to say. But that day, Marcus just sat and listened while the aliens listed all the reasons why humans should leave their space. They said humans were violent because they had fought wars on their home planet. They said humans were unpredictable because they made quick decisions. They said humans were too young as a species to understand how real civilization worked. When the final vote came, it was not even close. 47 species voted to kick humans out of council space. Only 3 voted to let them stay. Marcus had stood up when his turn came to speak. Everyone expected him to argue or beg or make threats like other species had done in the past. Instead, Marcus just said thank you for the decision and walked out of the hall. The aliens looked confused, but Jake understood. Marcus was showing them what real dignity looked like. Admiral Lisa Chun's voice came through the speakers all around the station. She was talking to every human ship and base in council space. Her voice was strong and clear like always. Lisa had been fighting space pirates and protecting trade routes for 20 years. She had saved more alien lives than anyone could count, but now those same aliens wanted her gone. All vessels, this is Admiral Chun. Her voice echoed through the empty hallways. We are leaving council space as requested. All human colonies and trade stations will close down in the next 3 days. All military patrols will return to human space. All trade agreements are now ended. We wish the council species good luck with their future. Jake watched as the big cargo ships loaded the last boxes of human technology. The aliens had always been curious about human inventions, but they never asked how things worked. They just bought the finished products and used them. Now all of that technology was going home with the humans. The medical equipment that could cure diseases in hours instead of days. The shield generators that could protect entire planets. The faster-than-light engines that made travel between stars as easy as driving to the next town. Captain Ryan Torres came to find Jake in the observation room. Ryan was young, but he had already seen more combat than most aliens saw in their whole lives. His ship had been patrolling the dangerous border regions where pirates liked to hide. Without human patrols, those areas would become very unsafe very quickly. The last transport is ready, Commander, Ryan said. Are you sure you want to be on the final ship out? Jake nodded and took one more look around the station. This place had been home to 300 humans and 5,000 aliens who worked together every day. The aliens had seemed happy to work with humans. They laughed at human jokes and ate human food and learned human games. But when their leaders said humans had to go, none of them spoke up to defend their human friends. The station had been more than just a place for diplomats to meet. It was a rescue center where human ships brought injured aliens from all over the galaxy. It was a research lab where human scientists worked with alien experts to solve problems that affected everyone. It was a cultural center where different species learned about each other. Now it would be empty and cold, floating in space with no purpose. Communications officer Beth Martinez was packing the last of the important files. Beth had spent years learning alien languages so she could help with translations. She spoke 12 different alien languages perfectly and could understand 6 more. The aliens always seemed amazed that humans could learn their complex ways of talking so easily. "Sir," Beth said, "we're getting a lot of messages from alien ships asking if we're really leaving. Some of them sound scared." Jake was not surprised. Human ships had always been the first to answer distress calls. When alien ships broke down or got attacked by pirates, they called for human help because they knew humans would come quickly. Human rescue teams were famous across the galaxy for risking their own lives to save strangers. But the council leaders had decided that this helpful nature was actually a sign that humans were too aggressive. The final loading took 6 more hours. Jake walked through every room of the station to make sure nothing important was left behind. In the medical bay, he found alien equipment that had been modified with human improvements. The aliens would probably not remember how to fix these machines when they broke down. In the communications center, he saw the big screens that had shown news from across the galaxy. Humans had always shared information freely with other species, even when it put them at a disadvantage. Dr. Marcus Webb called Jake on the personal communication channel. Marcus was already on his ship, heading back to human space. His voice sounded tired, but not bitter. "Jake," Marcus said, "I want you to know that leaving like this is the right thing to do. We could have fought the decision, or caused trouble, but that would have proved their point about us being violent. Walking away with dignity shows them who we really are." Jake understood what Marcus meant. Humans were not leaving because they were weak or afraid. They were leaving because they respected the Council's right to make decisions about their own space. Even when those decisions were unfair and stupid, humans would not force themselves on people who did not want them around. The last human ship left Council space exactly 72 hours after Admiral Chun's announcement. There were no big explosions or angry messages or threats of revenge. The humans just gathered their people and their things and quietly went home to the outer edge of the galaxy where they had always lived. The space they left behind suddenly felt much bigger and much more dangerous than it had before. Captain Ryan Torres sat in his command chair on the bridge of his ship watching the stars through the main screen. 6 months had passed since all the humans left Council space, and Ryan was now stationed at New Alston, a human colony near the edge of known space. The colony was growing fast as more humans decided they liked living away from the complicated politics of the alien Council. The communication panel started beeping with an incoming message. Communications Officer Beth Martinez turned to look at Ryan with a worried expression on her face. She had been getting these kinds of messages more and more often lately, and they always made her feel bad for the aliens who sent them. "Captain," Beth said, "we have another distress call from Council space. It's a Ceridian merchant ship." Ryan sighed and told her to put the message on the main screen. The face that appeared was blue-green, with large black eyes that looked very frightened. The Ceridian's voice was shaking as he spoke. "This is Freight Captain Vel Thorne of the Ceridian Merchant Guild," the alien said. "We are under attack by Kroger pirates near the Helios Nebula. Our convoy has 23 ships full of medical supplies for the Outer Rim colonies. The pirates have already destroyed 4 of our escort ships. We need immediate assistance." Ryan knew exactly where the Helios Nebula was located. His ship could reach that position in less than 2 hours if he pushed the engines hard. Before the humans left Council space, this would have been an easy decision. Human ships were always the first to respond to pirate attacks because they had the best weapons and the most experienced crews. Beth looked at Ryan hopefully. She knew what he was thinking because she was thinking the same thing. Those medical supplies were probably going to alien colonies that needed them to fight diseases. If the pirates stole the cargo, thousands of aliens might die from sickness. But they were no longer part of Council space, and the Council had made it very clear that humans were not welcome. "Send a reply," Ryan told Beth. "Tell Captain Vel Thorne that we received his message, but we are no longer operating in Council space. Suggest that he contact Council security forces for assistance." Beth typed the message, but her hands moved slowly, like she did not want to send it. The reply came back in just a few minutes, and the Ceridian captain sounded desperate. "Please," Vel Thorne said, "Council forces are 3 days away from our position. The pirates will have killed us all and taken our cargo by then. You are the only ships close enough to help us. I know there have been problems between humans and the Council, but we are talking about innocent lives here." Ryan felt a pain in his chest as he watched the alien's frightened face. Every instinct he had as a human told him to help. Human nature was to protect others, even when those others had treated them badly. But he also remembered the Council meeting, where alien leaders had called humans dangerous and violent. They had said humans could not be trusted to make good decisions. "Close the channel," Ryan said quietly. Beth stared at him for a moment before following the order. The screen went dark, and the bridge became very quiet. Everyone on the crew knew what they had just done, and nobody felt good about it. But they also knew that Captain Torres had made the right choice, even though it was the hard choice. Over the next few weeks, the same thing happened again and again. Alien ships called for help, and human ships that could easily provide that help had to say no. The aliens always sounded surprised and confused, like they could not understand why humans would refuse to help people in danger. Lieutenant Danny Foster was monitoring all the distress calls that came from Council space. Danny was good with numbers, and he kept track of how often these calls were coming in. What he found was very disturbing. Before humans left, there were maybe 5 or 6 pirate attacks each month in the areas where human ships used to patrol. Now there were more than 20 attacks every month in those same areas. The pirates had figured out that human ships were gone, and they were taking advantage of the situation. The Kroger pirates were especially bold because they knew that Council security ships were slow and far away. Pirates could attack a convoy, steal everything valuable, and escape before help arrived. Dr. Kevin Brooks was working in his new laboratory on Haven Colony when he got some very bad news from his contacts in Council space. Kevin had been the galaxy's top expert on treating void plague, a disease that could kill entire planets if it was not stopped quickly. During his time in Council space, Kevin had trained hundreds of alien doctors and set up rapid response teams that could reach any outbreak in less than a day. Now, Kevin was reading reports that void plague was spreading again in 3 different star systems. The alien doctors were trying their best, but they did not have the experience or the equipment that Kevin's teams used to have. Without human medical ships that could jump quickly from system to system, it took too long to get help to infected planets. The worst part was reading the messages from alien doctors who had worked with Kevin before. They were asking for advice on how to treat patients and requesting supplies that only human medical facilities could provide. Kevin wanted to help, but he was no longer allowed in Council space, and the Council had made it clear that they did not want human interference in their affairs. Patricia Williams received the first official message from the Council since the humans had left. Patricia was in charge of the Outer Colonies Congress, which was the human government for all the settlements beyond Council space. The message was very formal and polite, but Patricia could read between the lines and see that the Council was starting to worry. The message talked about mutual concerns regarding galactic security and suggested that it might be time for humans and the Council to discuss areas of common interest. Patricia showed the message to her advisors, and they all agreed that this was the Council's way of asking for help without actually admitting they needed help. Patricia's response was short and professional. She thanked the Council for their interest but explained that humans were no longer part of galactic civilization as defined by the Council. She wished them well in solving their problems and hoped they would find good solutions. What Patricia did not mention in her response was that human colonies were doing better than ever. Without having to spend time and resources helping ungrateful aliens, humans were able to focus on building their own communities and exploring new areas of space. They had made contact with several alien species that the Council had never bothered to visit because those species were considered too primitive or too far away to be worth the trouble. Part 3. The unraveling ambassador Elena Rodriguez sat in her office at Kepler Station, reading the latest intelligence reports from Council space. 1 year had passed since humanity's exodus, and the news was getting worse every day. Elena's job was to monitor what was happening in the galaxy so that human leaders could make good decisions about their own future. What she was seeing in these reports made her both sad and angry. The numbers were terrible and getting worse. Kroger pirate attacks had increased by 400% in the areas where human patrol ships used to operate. The pirates were not just stealing cargo anymore. They were attacking passenger ships and taking people as slaves to sell in the illegal markets beyond the galaxy's edge. Without human rescue ships to respond quickly to distress calls, many attacks that could have been stopped were now succeeding. Elena remembered how safe space travel used to be when humans were part of the galactic community. Human merchant ships traveled everywhere, and they always helped other ships in trouble. Pirates knew that attacking anyone near a human trade route was dangerous because human warships would come looking for them. Now those same trade routes were empty and dangerous. The Helix trade route had been the safest way to travel between the core worlds and the outer colonies for over 200 years. Human freight companies had used this route constantly, moving goods and people back and forth across the galaxy. Their presence had made the route safe without anyone really thinking about it. Merchant ships knew that if they broke down or got attacked, there would probably be a human ship nearby to help them. Now shipping companies were charging 3 times the normal price to use the Helix route because it had become so dangerous. Many companies had stopped using it completely and were taking much longer routes through safer space. This meant that goods took longer to reach their destinations and cost much more when they got there. Colonies that depended on regular supply shipments were starting to run short of important things like medicine and machine parts. Dr. Kevin Brooks stood in his new laboratory on Haven Colony, looking at data that made him feel sick to his stomach. Kevin had spent 15 years fighting void plague across the galaxy, and he thought the disease was finally under control. Human medical teams had been so good at responding to outbreaks that most people had forgotten how dangerous the plague could be. Now, void plague was spreading again in systems where Kevin's teams used to operate. The alien doctors were doing their best, but they did not have the training or the equipment that human medical teams had used. More importantly, they did not have the fast ships that could jump from system to system in hours instead of days. Void plague started spreading on a planet. Every hour mattered. The disease could double its infection rate every 6 hours if it was not treated properly. Human medical ships had been designed to detect plague outbreaks from space and land medical teams within minutes of arrival. The teams could set up treatment centers and start saving lives while the disease was still weak. Without human rapid response teams, the plague was spreading faster than alien medical services could handle. Kevin was reading reports of entire cities being quarantined because the infection had gotten too strong to treat. On 3 planets, the local governments had decided to evacuate healthy people and abandon the infected areas completely. The worst part was that Kevin knew exactly how to stop these outbreaks, but he could not help because humans were no longer welcome in council space. He had trained many alien doctors over the years, and they were sending him desperate requests for advice. Kevin answered their questions when he could, but advice was not the same as having experienced Medical teams on the ground. Agent Sophie Turner was working undercover in council space, pretending to be a trader from a species that looked similar to humans. Sophie's job was to gather information about what was really happening in the council and report back to human intelligence services. What she was seeing convinced her that the council was falling apart faster than anyone had expected. Military situation was the most serious problem. The Zephyrian front had been a line of defense that protected council space from the aggressive Draktor Empire. For 50 years, human military advisors had worked with local defense forces to keep the Draktor from expanding into council territory. The humans had never been officially in charge of the defense, but they had provided training, tactics, and equipment that made the local forces much more effective. Without human advisors, the Zephyrian front had collapsed in less than 6 months. 3 entire species had been conquered by the Draktor Empire, and their populations were now working as slaves in Draktor factories. The remaining defense forces were retreating toward the core worlds, and it looked like they would not be able to stop the Draktor advance. Sophie sent regular reports back to human intelligence, describing how scared the council species were becoming. The younger species especially were starting to question why their leaders had forced the humans to leave. Many of them remembered human traders and diplomats as friendly people who had always been willing to help solve problems. The economic problems were almost as bad as the military ones. Human companies had been major players in galactic trade, not because they were trying to control markets, but because they were good at finding efficient ways to move goods around. Human logistics experts had designed supply chains that kept thousands of worlds fed and supplied with everything they needed. When the humans left, those supply chains broke down. Nobody else had the combination of fast ships, good planning, and willingness to take risks that human merchants had provided. Colonies that had always received regular shipments of food and medicine were now waiting weeks or months for supplies that used to arrive on schedule. Senator Patricia Williams received another message from the council, this one much less formal than the first. The council was clearly getting desperate, and their polite diplomatic language was starting to crack. They were talking about urgent mutual interests and the need for experienced partners in addressing galactic challenges. Patricia discussed the message with President Nancy Clark and the other leaders of the human government. They all agreed that the council was basically begging for help without wanting to admit it. The aliens were too proud to say they had made a mistake, but they were running out of options. Patricia's response was polite but firm. She thanked the council for their continued interest in communication, but explained that humanity had found their current arrangements very satisfactory. The humans had built new relationships with species beyond council space and were not interested in returning to a situation where they were not welcome. What Patricia did not tell the council was that humanity was thriving in ways they had never experienced before. Free from the restrictions and politics of council space, human explorers had made contact with dozens of new species that were eager to trade and share knowledge. These species appreciated human help and treated humans as equals rather than dangerous outsiders. Council Prime Yethkora stood before the emergency assembly of the Galactic Council 18 months after humanity had left their space. The ancient Altarian leader had lived for over 3,000 years and had seen the council through many crises, but nothing had prepared him for the disaster that was unfolding across the galaxy. The great chamber that had once been filled with confident voices discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges now buzzed with panic and desperation. Yethkora's voice carried the weight of his years as he addressed the assembled representatives. "Fellow council members," he began, "we face the greatest crisis in our 10,000-year history. The humans must be convinced to return. Our intelligence networks report that they have established a thriving confederation beyond the rim, trading with species we never even knew existed. The Vorthic representative who had originally called for humanity's expulsion shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Counselor Zex Prime had been so confident 18 months ago when he declared that primitive species always knew when they were outmatched. Now his own territory was overrun with pirates, and his people were begging him to find some way to bring back the human patrol ships that had kept their space lanes safe. Meanwhile, Admiral Danny Foster of the human Deep Space Fleet read the latest intelligence reports from their exploration vessels in his command center on the edge of human space. The reports painted a very different picture from what the Council was experiencing. Humanity had indeed found new friends among the species of the Outer Rim, races that the Council had dismissed as too primitive or too far away to bother with. The Kellites were one of these new allies. They were a young species with a natural ability to manipulate quantum fields with their minds. The Council had considered them interesting, but not advanced enough for membership, because they had not developed faster-than-light travel on their own. When human explorers made contact, they found the Kellites eager to learn and quick to understand human engineering principles. Working together, humans and Kellites had developed new types of shield technology that were more effective than anything the Council had ever created. The Kellites could use their quantum manipulation abilities to strengthen human shield designs in ways that no other species could match. In exchange, humans shared their knowledge of space travel and helped the Kellites explore their own solar system for the first time. The Northic collectives were another species that had become close allies with humanity. These beings were masters of biotechnology who could grow living ships and organic computers that were more powerful than mechanical ones. The Council had ignored them because their technology seemed too different and strange to be useful. But humans had always been good at adapting to new ideas, and they quickly saw the potential in Northic biotechnology. Human engineers worked with Northic bioshapers to create hybrid ships that combined the best of both technologies. These new vessels could repair themselves when damaged and could adapt to different environments in ways that traditional ships could not. Agent Sophie Turner sent another coded message from deep inside Council space describing the increasingly desperate situation. The Draktor Empire had conquered 6 more star systems in the past month, and their advance showed no signs of slowing down. The Council military forces were in full retreat, and several member species were talking about surrendering rather than fighting a hopeless battle. Sophie had managed to get close to some of the Council's military planners, and what she heard made her realize just how much the aliens had depended on human expertise without ever acknowledging it. Human military advisors had not just provided tactics and training. They had served as the backbone of the entire Council defense strategy for decades. The humans had a way of thinking about warfare that was different from other species. Most aliens approached battle like a formal dance with rules that everyone understood. Humans treated war like a problem to be solved using whatever tools were available. This flexibility had made them incredibly effective at stopping enemies who did not follow traditional patterns. Without human advisors, the Council forces kept trying to fight the Draktor using old tactics that had worked against previous enemies. But the Draktor were adaptable and aggressive, much like humans had been. They took advantage of the Council's predictable responses and turned every battle into a victory for their empire. Border Guard Commander Alex Johnson received a surprise visit at his station on the edge of human space. A Council delegation had arrived asking for permission to enter human territory for diplomatic talks. Alex recognized the lead diplomat as the same Vorthic who had spoken so harshly about humans during the expulsion hearings. The delegation's ship was impressive, but Alex could see signs of recent combat damage that had been hastily repaired. Their escort vessels looked tired, and their crews seemed nervous. These were not the confident representatives of a powerful government. These were desperate people looking for help from someone they had badly mistreated. Alex followed his orders and politely turned the delegation away. "I'm sorry," he told them, "but the Outer Rim Alliance does not currently have diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. If you wish to establish formal communications, you will need to submit a request through proper channels." The Vorthic diplomat's face showed emotions that Alex had never seen from his species before. Fear, shame, and desperation mixed together. As the alien realized that the humans were not going to make this easy for them. The Council had expected humans to jump at the chance to rejoin galactic civilization. Instead, they were being treated like strangers who had to prove they were worth talking to. President Nancy Clark reviewed the intelligence reports in her office on the capital world of the human colonies. The reports showed that the Outer Rim Alliance now controlled more territory than the Council did. Human exploration fleets had made contact with over 30 new species in the past year, and most of them were eager to join the growing alliance. The alliance was based on principles that were very different from the Council's approach to government. Instead of having ancient species control younger ones, the alliance treated all members as equals, regardless of how long they had been traveling in space. Instead of requiring members to follow strict rules about technology and culture, the alliance encouraged experimentation and innovation. Captain Maria Santos submitted her reconnaissance report on the Council's current military situation. Maria's ship had been conducting surveillance missions along the border between human space and Council territory. What she found confirmed everyone's worst fears about how badly things were going for the aliens. The Council had lost effective control over roughly 60% of their former territory. Pirate gangs controlled large areas that used to be safe trade routes. The Draktor Empire was advancing on multiple fronts and showed no signs of slowing down. Most serious of all, several Council member species were secretly negotiating with the Outer Rim Alliance about switching sides. The bitter irony was not lost on human leaders who studied these reports. Every problem the Council faced could have been prevented if they had simply allowed humans to continue doing what they had always done. Humans had never asked to rule the galaxy or control other species. They had just wanted to help make space safer and more prosperous for everyone. 3 years had passed since humanity walked away from Council space, and the galaxy had changed in ways that nobody could have predicted. The once mighty Galactic Council, which had ruled over thousands of star systems for more than 10,000 years, now struggled to maintain control over less than half of their original territory. Captain Maria Santos completed her final reconnaissance mission along the old border, and her report painted a picture of complete systemic collapse. Council's economic system had fallen apart when human trade networks disappeared. Human merchants had not just moved goods from one place to another. They had created a web of relationships and dependencies that kept thousands of worlds connected and supplied. When the humans left, that web broke apart and left entire regions isolated from the galactic economy. Colonies that had always received regular shipments of food, medicine, and manufactured goods now went months without supplies. Some worlds had been forced to return to primitive farming and manufacturing just to survive. Others had simply been abandoned. As their populations fled to safer areas closer to the Council's core worlds, President Nancy Clark sat in her office, reading the final message that the Council had sent to humanity. The message had been delivered by a Helian courier who had to travel through increasingly dangerous space to reach human territory. The journey that used to take 3 days now took 2 weeks because the courier had to avoid pirate-controlled areas and find safe places to refuel. The message was very different from the formal diplomatic notes that the Council had sent before. This time, there was no attempt to hide their desperation behind polite language. The Council was formally apologizing for their decision to expel humanity and begging them to return. They offered full Council membership, recognition as a founding civilization, and a permanent seat on the ruling committee. Secretary of State Robert King helped Nancy draft their response. Robert had been a diplomat for 30 years, and he knew how to write messages that said exactly what they meant without being insulting. The response thanked the council for their apology and their offer, but politely declined to rejoin an organization that had treated humanity so badly. What the message did not mention was how well humanity was doing without the council. The Outer Rim Alliance now included over 50 different species and controlled more space than the council had ever ruled. More importantly, the alliance was growing stronger every year while the council grew weaker. The alliance worked because it was built on cooperation instead of control. Each member species contributed what they did best, and everyone benefited from the combined knowledge and resources. Humans provided leadership, organization, and military protection. The Callites contributed their quantum manipulation abilities. The Northic collectives shared their biotechnology. Dozens of other species added their own unique skills to the growing confederation. Dr. Kevin Brooks had established the galaxy's most advanced medical research center on Haven Colony. The center combined human medical knowledge with alien biotechnology to create treatments that were far superior to anything the Council had ever developed. Kevin's teams had not only conquered Void Plague, but had found cures for dozens of other diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. The irony was that Kevin's medical advances were now being smuggled into Council space by black market traders. Desperate alien governments were paying huge amounts of money for human-developed medicines because their own medical systems could no longer handle the diseases that were spreading through their territories. Admiral Danny Foster reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the former Council territories. The military situation had become completely hopeless for the aliens. The Draktor Empire now controlled almost a quarter of what used to be Council space, and their advance showed no signs of stopping. The remaining Council forces had retreated to a defensive line around their core worlds, but even this position looked unlikely to hold. Without human military advisors, the alien commanders kept making the same tactical mistakes over and over again. They approached each battle like a formal exercise, instead of adapting to what their enemies were actually doing. Several Council species had already begun secret negotiations with the Outer Rim Alliance about switching sides. They could see that the Alliance was winning while the Council was falling apart. These species were offering to share intelligence about Council defenses in exchange for protection from the Draktor Empire. Agent Sophie Turner sent her final report from Council space before evacuating to human territory. Sophie had spent months watching the Council government tear itself apart as different species blamed each other for the disaster. The younger species wanted to surrender to the Draktor rather than face total destruction. The older species insisted on fighting to the end, even though they had no chance of winning. The worst part was listening to Council leaders finally admit that they had made a terrible mistake by forcing humanity to leave. In private conversations, they talked about how much they missed having human ships patrolling their space and human diplomats helping to solve their problems. But their pride would not let them beg for forgiveness in a way that might actually convince humans to help them. Commander Jake Morrison, now in charge of border security for the Alliance, received daily reports of Council ships trying to cross into human space. Most of these ships were refugees fleeing from the chaos in their home territories. Jake's orders were to provide humanitarian assistance, but not to allow any military vessels or government officials to enter Alliance space. Without proper authorization, the refugee ships told horrible stories about what was happening in Council territory. Entire star systems had been abandoned as their populations fled toward the galactic core. Pirate gangs controlled vast areas and demanded tribute from anyone who wanted to travel through their space. Disease outbreaks were spreading unchecked because there were no medical teams capable of stopping them. President Nancy Clark held a cabinet meeting to discuss whether humanity should offer any assistance to the collapsing Council. Some advisors argued that helping the aliens would be the right thing to do regardless of how they had treated humanity. Others pointed out that the Council had made their choice and should be allowed to face the consequences. In the end, Nancy decided that humanity would continue to accept refugees and provide humanitarian aid to anyone who needed it. But the Alliance would not get involved in the Council's military or political problems. If the aliens wanted human help with those issues, they would need to formally apply for membership in the Outer Rim Alliance and accept the Alliance's principles of equality and cooperation. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about the value of cooperation over the past 3 years. The Council's belief that advanced technology and ancient wisdom were enough to maintain civilization had been proven wrong. Real civilization required people who were willing to help others, to take risks for strangers, and to put the common good ahead of their own interests. Humanity had provided those qualities for decades without asking for recognition or reward. When the aliens decided they no longer wanted human help, the humans had quietly walked away and built something better elsewhere. Now the Council was paying the price for their pride and their mistakes, while humanity and their new allies looked toward a future full of possibilities among the stars.